right, we have Leanne here, and her presentation is called Literacy Links Leveraging Your Role by Supporting Literacy Intervention. Leanne, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
So here's our agenda. We are going to first jump into our introductions and backgrounds. Then we're going to talk about what structured linguistic literacy is and an overview of cognitive load theory. Then you'll talk about exploring the reciprocal relationship between oral and written language. Then we'll talk about practical techniques for utilizing print in therapy or in education, and how SLPs, how parents, how educators can incorporate language intervention and disciplinary literacy into our practice as well as the curriculum. And then we'll wrap up with some resources, references, and closing remarks. Leanne, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you. So my name's Leanne Dall, and I live in Portland, Oregon right now, currently moving to Cincinnati. I'm an ASHA certified, EBLI-certified pediatric speech language pathologist. I worked in the public schools, then shifted to a private practice, passionate about the role of the SLP in literacy, and I advocate for integrated language and literacy intervention for optimal impact. I am the author of several Bjorm speech language decks, and I enjoy exploring local playgrounds and parks with my kids and listening to audiobooks.
I love that. What does EBLI stand for?
Oh, good question. EBLI stands for evidence-based literacy instruction. And so we talk about evidence-based literacy instruction all the time. And this EBLI is actually a program, or it's an approach that is trademarked.
Okay, that's great to know. I'm like just diving into all of this. So looking at what different approaches there are, and if anybody wants to further their knowledge in this area or become certified, just knowing what options are available.
Yeah, and they have a lot of free videos, so you can really get a good taste. So
Oh, great. That's awesome. And if anybody is just joining in for this presentation, I will quickly introduce myself. I'm Vanita Litvak. I go by she, her. I have a passion for AAC and literacy. I've had the opportunity to present at local and national conferences like ASHA, and I co-authored the Lou Knows What to Do book series that was published by Boys Town Press. And when I'm not doing speech-related things or podcasting, I enjoy taking tennis lessons, trying new restaurants, and reading books with my 3.5-year-old daughter. All right, I'll go ahead and share my financial disclosures first, and then I'll let you go, Leanne. So I have ownership interest in Speechy Side Up LLC and Tassel Learning LLC. I receive royalties from Boys Town Press. I'm also an affiliate for Simple Practice and Meaningful Speech, and I am a member of ASHA. How about you, Leanne?
okay, so the following relevant financial relationships. So I am the author of several Bjorm speech language decks, including the story deck, the past tense verb deck, spelling and homophones decks, prefixes, suffixes, and basis deck. And there's a couple more in the works, and I do receive royalty payments for these. And I also am receiving an honorarium for this presentation and commission for any sales made with my link code. And I am also a member of ASHA.
Yeah, and that says Vanita. That's my fault, but this is under Leanne. She is also a member of ASHA. All right, so by the end of this presentation today, we hope that you'll be able to identify how oral language skills and literacy development support each other, describe structured linguistic literacy approaches and the SLP's role, identify strategies and techniques for integrating print effectively into sessions, and describe how SLPs, but not only SLPs, because we do have other educators here and caregivers as well, can integrate language intervention and disciplinary literacy into their practice to enhance outcomes for their students. All right, so let's talk about the relationship between oral language and how it supports literacy.
Okay, so whenever I get this question, I always go back to when I was working in the public schools, and I was sitting in an IEP meeting, and a parent asked about their child's reading and writing abilities. And I started to speak. I was the speech pathologist on the team. And somebody cut me off, and they were like, "Oh, but you don't do reading and writing, you do language." And that question really just got me thinking. And I think that's really the impetus that set me down on this path to exploring the relationship between oral language and literacy. So we oral language is foundational to written language. So oral language is innate. We've only been reading for about 5,000 years. We typically think about, okay, if we have the oral language, we can understand it, we can speak it, then we should be able to learn to read and write it. And the sound, the morphemes, the vocabulary, everything that we can write, it's a pretty clear connection that we use the same language. So we use that language as the foundation. What's less common to think about is that while oral language is foundational for written language, then as our literacy skills develop, they also have a reciprocal effect, and they kind of fortify our oral language abilities. Now, this happens at the phoneme level. So when we learn to read and write, then our phonemic awareness improves. We know that the people that have the best phonemic awareness skills are strong readers. This also impacts vocabulary. So when kids or people are not able to access written language, then their vocabulary declines. And so it's the rich get richer, the poor get poorer idea. And so by having a lot of access to the written word, to written language, then we really can strengthen vocabulary, and we mitigate that Matthew effect from really ever happening. Incidental learning, I think about this a lot. So just our ability to learn from signs or from walls in the classroom or from brochures that are put in front of us. There's a lot of learning that we can learn about the world and add to our spoken language based on the written word. And then what we're going to talk about today a lot is that written language really provides shared and meaningful context for intervention and for our oral language. So if we can read about more complex ideas that are not as contextualized as maybe our conversations would be, then we can create so many more contexts for our oral language and so much more exposure. So it's really amazing to see how this kind of cyclical effect. And as we go through our lives, it's not like, oh, okay, now you've learned to talk, now you're done. Like we keep on honing that skill, and then of course developing the metalinguistic, or like the ability to think about how we're saying something or what our audience is more carefully. And reading and writing can also help us develop that skill.
Is it fair to say that because you can speak, it doesn't mean that you can then read, but because you could read, it could affect how you speak, or no?
Yeah. So, one does not entail the other. And we know that there are readers who don't speak and readers and writers who don't speak. I think it certainly eases the process of learning if we do. But we also know plenty of people who can listen to words and speak to them, and speak them, but then not read and write. As we learn to read and write, it can definitely have an effect, especially if we raise awareness to the metalinguistic aspects of reading and writing, then it can improve our oral language for sure.
Yeah. The whole idea that it's not innate is really, I feel like it's really eye-opening, because as a parent, I just thought, okay, if they expose to text, if we, read 3 books every day and just like talk about the letters, that it'll naturally develop. And I don't know if I missed that part in grad school or what, but just like within this conference and taking different courses recently, I realized like how structured the instruction really needs to be. And we're going to talk a lot about that today.
Yeah. And it's interesting because reading is not innate for anybody, and for the population. So it's not natural, though sometimes when you see, if like my first daughter, when she learned to read, like it was really easy for her. It didn't have to be so structured. So we do have some kids like that, but she still had to be exposed to books. She had to be taught the basic code, and then could kind of take leaps and bounds from there. And then we definitely see that for other kids, and for the majority of the kids or people that we work with, then the written language really does have to be taught in a very structured and explicit way for it to be meaningful. For the population that we work with as speech pathologists, then oral language is often not as innate. So even though they're exposed to language in maybe a similar way, then because of a brain difference, it's harder to learn how to use pronouns correctly, or how to use that sentence structure, how to use the speech sounds. And so I really like that connection, that we need to be structured about our reading and writing instruction. We also are structured when we're doing our kind of regular profession of fostering oral language skills, because it wasn't as innate as maybe it would have been, or maybe it is for somebody else.
That's such a great point. It's such a good point because, yeah, when I'm thinking about language development, thinking early language development, but as you're getting to those higher level language skills, like sometimes it does have to be more explicitly taught. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And even just one more thing about that is, so developmental language disorder is what we're now calling SL, specific language impairment, or expressive and receptive language disability. And that's impacting our late talkers, our kids that are coming to us for speech therapy. And it impacts kids at the reading level and at the writing level. And then for kids who have speech sound disorder difficulties, so they're struggling to produce a sound correctly, maybe they're more difficult to understand than their peers, then they are also often at risk for difficulty with reading and writing too. And the reason for that is because we can't separate the phonology aspect from speech sound errors. So like every speech sound error has a articulation component, which is the motor component, and then a phonology component, which is the language-based component. So 25% of kids who are still receiving speech therapy in kindergarten will have difficulty learning to read and write. So it's just interesting how it all falls through from there. And
Yeah, how it's all related. Okay. Anything else you want to add here before we move on?
I think that's it for now.
Okay. So what does structured linguistic literacy look like?
Okay, so structured linguistic literacy, and I think a lot of people haven't heard about it. It is an approach that is different from more traditional approaches to teach kids to learn to read, so different than the Orden-Gillingham approach. And the way that it is structured is completely based on the structure and organization of oral language. So I put a file cabinet here because there's often a metaphor used that we're creating and organizing the filing cabinet for the written language based on oral language organization. So it's set up by the sounds rather than by the spellings, or by the learning, by the spellings that the kids learn. And I like coming at this aspect and at this approach from a speech language pathologist perspective, because it's so based at the phoneme level. We know that the hallmark of dyslexia and reading difficulties is due to a difficulty with phonological awareness at the phoneme level. So people who struggle to learn to read and write at the code level, they have difficulty gluing and ungluing the sounds and words. But we can capitalize on the oral language that they have and on the sounds that they have by using an organization system that's natural to them. Are you following? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm following. That makes sense. Yeah. And I appreciate you like breaking down what decoding actually means for anybody who isn't familiar with the term. So I thank you for that.
And so there are 4 main components or tenets of a structured linguistic literacy approach. And so when a child first comes, we want them to understand that letters spell sounds. So the letters represent sounds in words. And we're going back to that oral language. What sound do you hear? Say your sound. And then we can learn what letters represent them. We also want them to understand that sounds can be represented by 1 to 4 letters. So we can have the sound A being represented by the letter A in vacation. We can also have it represented by 4 letters, as in way, like EIGH. Okay, there's no sound that has 0 letters representing it, and there is no sound that has 5 or more. There's also multiple spellings to represent a single sound. So Similar to that, we can represent the sound A with just an A, with an A and E, or with an AY and AI. There could be multiple different ways. And finally, that spellings can be pronounced in multiple ways. So if we have the spelling EA, that can be pronounced as E, like in read, or as A, like in break, or as like in head. And so these are the four principles, the four components that we really want our kids to understand. And in teaching these skills, there are these principles, there are just endless opportunities for phonemic awareness development. And we're increasing that metalinguistic, that awareness, that connection between written language and the oral language base, that everything that is so foundational.
So would you say that structure and linguistic literacy really only focuses on that phonemic awareness level, or does it get into word level reading and higher as well?
Oh, so that's a great question. So you're constantly working at the sound level, at the word level, in sentences and in passages. And it actually moves really quickly between them, so that if you picture that reading rope, we're tackling every single part of the reading rope. So we're tackling vocabulary, we're tackling background knowledge, we're tackling the phoneme level, we're doing the decoding, we're segmenting, all at once. So it's really intertwined.
What age are you starting that at? Like if toddlers are able to learn letter sound correspondences, when are you like tacking on the next levels?
That's a great question. So I work in private practice, and I often have kids come to me like 3 or 4 years old, typically because they're struggling to say a specific sound, or maybe a parent notices, or another professional refers them to me because they have a language need. And so since we know that these kids are at risk for having difficulty with written language, then oftentimes I'll start to build this in right away, like age 3, age 4, definitely age 4 and 5, starting to teach these principles so that the kids can learn how to blend sounds together to make words, and how to pull them apart to spell words. And once they get going, I find that typically if you start it very young, then they don't need support for an extended period of time, because they understand it. And we're essentially rewiring their brain and making sure that they're using the best parts of their brain, the most efficient parts of their brain, to do this encoding and decoding practice. So I have the benefit of starting to work with kids young. I would say 3 is a bit early. I have one kid that I started at 3, and definitely letter exposure, my own kids work with at 3, but I also have kids starting at age 14. And the way that it's structured is you don't necessarily have to go back. You have to go to basics and make sure that they have these principles, but you don't stay at basics very long. So you can move them into content that they need to understand very quickly.
Okay. And do you find that, I imagine that like once they grasp the idea of like how to blend, that moves quick. Like you, even as they're learning like newer sounds, they already acquired like how to blend. So then they can move into that.
Exactly. So once they understand that principle, that letter spell sounds, sounds make up words, and this is how we blend and segment them, then they can really take off. And we think of it like from an adult perspective, it's like, oh, that's so confusing. And maybe I shouldn't tell them that you can spell A with 4 letters and you can spell A with 2 letters. Like, how do their brains handle that? But what I see is that it's way less of a big deal to the kids than it is to the parents. And the parents are like their minds are blown. And the little kids are like, okay. And then it's funny, the kids in like 3rd or 4th grade, they're like, you're kidding me? Like, why did my kindergarten teacher not tell me this? And they might have been in reading, tutoring, or instruction for the past 2-3 years, and their minds are completely blown that this is how it works. So then, yeah, you're exactly right, that once you have the principles, it's just all the same.
Yeah, because I imagine that like, I mean, if you didn't say that, I feel like I would think that it's way over like a child's head, but I feel like that makes it worse because then it's not like forthcoming on what they're going to be experiencing as they're learning to read. And it can be defeating when they come across like these, words that are not typically like spelled how you would imagine they would be. So if you're just being forthright about it, it could be, I guess, like maybe a little bit challenging in the beginning, but better in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. And the way that structured linguistic literacy works is we're not asking them to memorize the spellings for the different words. We're exposing them, we're explaining them, we're telling them which environments, like this is more common in the middle of a word, this is more common at the end. But they're going to continue to be exposed to the spellings as they progress. So they don't have to have mastered it in order to move to the next level. And every time they come across it, it's reinforcing something that they've learned. And that is intuitive because they know that they're just spelling the A sound. Now, I should clarify that initially we would work on the basic code and then really starting with short vowels, right? So starting with mat and cat and hat, like a typical program that you would see, and then progressing, adding in 2-letter spellings for consonants, and then engaging the vowel teams. And this makes text much more accessible to them. And then less surprising overall. So,
and this would be like an EBLI approach, right?
This is the EBLI approach. Now, EBLI is one program or one product that was made. There's also Reading Simplified, there's Sounds Right, there's On Track Reading. So there are many options that I am familiar with and happy to share with people.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure we're going to get questions about that. And every speaker is given like some of their recommendations. Like the speaker I just spoke to talked about UFly. So I imagine there's a lot out there.
Yeah, there's a lot out there and always something to discuss.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So can you like talk a little bit more about like what the no shaving cream or other materials means?
Yes. So the way I think about this is shaving cream is fun. I love seeing it in preschools, and this like sandpaper. I really have nothing against those things. But when we're talking about what multisensory is, the way that it came about is that we're talking about speaking, hearing, and listening and writing. Like we're talking about that multisensory, and we don't need to bring in all of these extraneous materials or extra fun things that can take away time from what we're doing. So once you're using shaving cream, and I have used shaving cream, but then you're dealing with the cleanup and the mess, and like they're not getting practice actually writing with a pencil or with a marker. That's more similar to what they're doing in school or what they will need to do in school later. So it's just really going down to the pure initial meaning of multisensory.
Okay. Now, forgive my naivety. How do you make it fun?
Okay, so
Or are you just keeping the instructions so like short time wise that it's like the fun comes like after or before?
So great question. So I think that really depends on the kids. Try to keep we keep the relationship and the conversation fun. So like there's a lot of little like jokes coming in. We might play a game after a certain number of activities or after a certain number of minutes, or when the kid just needs a break, we might pull in something that is, say, like Zingo, or could pull in shaving cream if we need a break like that. But I find that the kids, like it's kind of fun enough, to be honest. Yeah. And by feeling successful and seeing what they're learning, then that's making the reading and the writing as effective enough to make the reading more enjoyable. So they feel accomplished and it's not taking so much time. I typically work with kids for one time a week, sometimes 2 times a week. And then I have a couple kids that I see 3 times a week. But with 1 time a week, they're making huge gains in their reading fluency, and they don't have to really come for an extended period of time. So we're not talking years for many kids. We're talking months to a year, and then they're ready to go. So I think it's just really, really relationship based. We do some fun erasing on the whiteboard and give them what they need.
Yeah. No, and I understand it definitely depends on the child. So, like for instance, my child and my client that I'm thinking are very good. They love to learn. Like they are very good at like, you know, sitting down and working with me and it's intrinsically motivating for them. But again, I can think of other kids that I've had on my caseload where definitely would need to be a little bit more creative, but I could see how like you're trying to move through this like quickly so that they're not learning these sounds for forever, you know?
Yeah, so they're not learning the sounds and the spellings. And then once they're into reading, then generally pick something that they're really interested in. So
Mhm.
I have a fourth grader right now who's really interested in Greek mythology. So we don't even need a game because he just wants to learn about like Poseidon and Zeus and all the wars. And then we're making a comic book. So he writes a summary based on what we've read for each god. And then he's illustrating the comic book, and that's his fun. And we have so much fun with it. With other kids, sometimes when they first come, we might only really get 10 minutes in a 45-minute session of work done. But then slowly we're also shifting to improve their executive function skills and their ability to attend to something that's maybe even not preferred for a longer period of time. So then it might shift to like 20, 25, 30, 15, and working their way up to develop these skills that they'll need. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it makes me think again about like those higher level language skills that need to be explicitly taught. Let's say conjunctions, you know, and they can be taught in conversation and during play, but sometimes they also need to be explicitly taught. So just thinking about it that way kind of helps me relate it to like reading and writing as well, and like why that needs to be more explicit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
All right, awesome. Okay, so anything else you want to cover here before we move on?
No, we can go to the next one.
Okay. So let's talk about the benefits of structured linguistic literacy.
Okay, so we touched on some of these before, but my favorite thing about structured linguistic literacy is that it is really in line with cognitive load theory. So, what cognitive load theory says is that basically we all have a limited amount of cognition or of working memory space that we need to gain information and move it into what we know. And anything that takes away or sorry, that adds to the load or distracts us cognitively from what we're working on makes it harder for us to learn, right? Because our cognitive load is impacted. So I always think about this, like I have 4 little kids. I'm really, really good at making macaroni and cheese. Now, when I have my 8-year-old needing me to sign off on her homework and my 6-year-old asking to play basketball and my 4-year-old is, I don't know what he's doing, knocking down his brother's Lego, and
Yeah.
then my baby needs a diaper change, then making that macaroni and cheese is so much harder. So all of a sudden, and then my phone's ringing, like I'm distracted, my attention's being pulled. I'm thinking like, okay, what should I prioritize? And I burnt macaroni and cheese. So like we want to limit the demands on the cognitive load so that we can match the kid's capacity or the person's capacity that we're working with. And so something about structured linguistic literacy is the language is the same throughout. So we're constantly saying the sounds. Where the routines are the same. So it's a series of different activities. I think there might be 11 activities, and they repeat themselves throughout so that there's a routine and a framework for what the kids are doing. They don't need to remember that this is called a digraph and that this is called I don't know, a short vowel even. Like they don't have to have extra load asking them to memorize what's not useful for language. And so what happens is by reducing the cognitive load, by reducing the distractions, then they're really zoned in on what they're doing and they can start to pick up on the process and remembering the sounds that the letters make us say much more easily. And to the point that we start to engage their statistical learning. So our brains are wired to look for patterns. And when we see patterns, then what we do is we apply that pattern to even what we haven't been taught. And this is why we don't need to be taught to say every word we know how to say or to say or to read every word that we know how to say, or to spell. You can spell words that you've never seen before because you can apply your statistical learning to it. So we need that to take off. And it feeds into the self-teaching hypothesis, which is by Scher, that once we get to a certain point, the kids teach themselves. And that's when they no longer need to come to us for support with their reading and writing, or with their reading. They might need different skills, but we want to get our kids to that point of self-teaching, to that point where, as we were talking about, like someone who does not have difficulty learning to read naturally gets to really quickly. We want to get all our kids there really quickly and have them mirror that development, and not just mirror it, but like really be in that phase of development of self-teaching. So another thing about structured linguistic literacy is that it feeds into how we learn. So we learn by retrieving. So if we don't retrieve information, then there's a great book, Make It Stick. I highly recommend it. If we don't retrieve information, we're probably not going to learn it. So by constantly having the kids retrieve the letter sound, retrieve the way that a letter is made, retrieve a word, we're feeding into that. We're also, in this approach, we're not waiting for mastery, as we said before. So you don't need 90% before moving on to the next thing, which matches how we typically learn information. We don't learn how to do something, wait till we've mastered it, and then go on and learn something else. It kind of is a cyclical effect. And we have interleaved practice where we continue to gain the skills, and our ultimate goal is mastery, but we don't have to hit mastery at every single point. So that also enables us to move faster because we're not waiting for that. There's minimal memorization, which also feeds into the cognitive load. And then my most important is that it is contextualized. So it is highly relevant to our kids. We're getting them into reading and writing, and we can address all of their language skills. Even if we're not addressing it, once a kid can read, then they're being exposed to so much more language, and it's helping them really connect in a very real way to the world that's around them. And so these are my favorite things about it, and why I chose to delve further into this approach.
Yeah, I could see why. It's really fascinating. And I could see like how you could just dedicate your entire career to this one area.
Yes, I think you could. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So let's talk about the importance of incorporating print into therapy sessions, into school, sessions. Let's talk about that.
Okay, so I think I read recently that a typical kid who has a disability is only engaged in reading and writing for an hour a day. Sorry, a minute a day.
No.
Yeah,
Wow.
I would need to, I think it's from studies that were maybe 2014 and in the 1990s.
What grade? Sorry. What grade was that?
I'm pretty sure it was kids with disabilities in grades 2. I think there was 2 to 3, and then another one. I need to find it to give you the
Okay.
information. And I was shocked to see, like, okay, for 1 minute a day, that's not very much practice. So that's also why when they come to me, then like, this is what we're doing because this is your time, So want to give them as many minutes as possible. Now, there was an amazing article. I know that Dr. Kelly Farquharson was one of the authors on it, and it's in the resources. And it talked all about the importance of including print in our therapy sessions. And so we can extend that into whatever instruction we're doing with our kids. We know from research by Justice that kids who know 18 letters by the time they're entering kindergarten, they are more likely to be able to learn to read and write easily. And so we want to expose our kids in the books we're reading. We want to call attention to print. And in speech therapy sessions, we want to connect the way that we write the letters to the sound of them. So even if I'm not working on reading or writing with a kid, I try to make sure that I'm writing down the letter that the sound that we're working on represents. So I'm just, okay, I'll put an S there. And we see that letters are often the best cues for our kids once they learn them. But by exposing them to them, they can learn what the sounds represent. Now, it can be good for eliciting sounds, so you can give a list of words, or even if you give pictures, then highlight the target sound, the letter that represents their target sound. It's also really useful for correcting. So sometimes, especially with longer words, I'll have a kid be saying a word. You'll see on the next page, there's a picture of the word important. And this kid was convinced that it was important. So then I could show them in print and they could trust the print. Like, no, this is actually the way it is. And this makes us say, so they could use that to help correct their speech. For kids who have apraxia or more phonological difficulties, that it's hard to say those multisyllabic words, they can use once they know how to read the words, they can use the words to help them make sure that they're matching the sounds to what they're trying to say. And then we know that phonemic awareness is best developed with letters. So we don't need to be engaging our kids in oral phonemic awareness skill practice only. We might as well be targeting blending and segmenting using letters in our practice. And I think a lot of times when our kids have residual speech sound errors that they're not correcting, it's because their phonemic awareness is struggling and they're not realizing, even if they can say the sounds, they're not realizing that the sounds are there. And so by developing their phonemic awareness, we're really killing two birds with one stone, because we're improving their phonemic awareness with their letters, which is going to help them read and write. And we're also seeing faster progress with their speech sound production. And then another way that we can incorporate print is by pulling target words from text. So whether we're reading something, like I was just working with an older student and working with her, she's still working on the sound. Now, it could be something so unrelated. We might be reading about banyan trees, and I can pull out the words from the text that have the sound, call attention to them, practice them at the word level, put them back, we can practice them in the context of the passage. And we can use principles of motor learning to incorporate it, but we can pull it from an informational context-based text, or we can also look for sound-loaded stories, say from something like You Fly, or there's other great options on Teachers Pay Teachers, and we can find sound-loaded passages and pull these target words from text as well. But every time we're including print, then we're just increasing our impact and setting the stage for future learning.
Wait, so would you recommend, this is going to be a speech therapy specific type of question, that therapists who are using cards of visuals that don't include the letter to work on a sound, replace those or supplement them?
So I don't think that you need to replace them. And I think that sometimes, like I personally use the Bjorm speech sound cues. And there are other nice cues out there. And those speak to kids as well. So I might use the cue and show them the letter so that they can start to link them, because we want them, ultimately, they're not going to go to school and be reading in speech sound cues. We want them to make that connection. So I think for all visuals that we use, it's just important, and cues in general, is to remember that it's a bridge. Most visuals are a bridge. Now, letters are not a bridge. That's the means to the end, but it's also the end goal, is that we want them to be reading and writing with letters for all the years to come. So
it reminds me of like Lively Letters, right? Like they had the letter paired with a visual. I haven't seen your cards, Leanne, so forgive me, but I feel like you should be creating like the visual and the letters together.
So Bjorn just did that without me. They did the Better Letters.
Okay.
The Better Letters program. And something that is kind of nice about those is that the letter is separate from the picture.
Like Lively. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's like when they're looking at an S, they don't have anything distracting them.
Yeah.
From the S shape, and they're not. Now I know that there's different research on, are the mnemonics helpful or are they not? But for me, like ultimately, I want them to go over to just the letter. Working on a speech sound. Now it is, let's say I'm working on, let's say the sound R. Okay, we're the sound R. So working on pre-vocalic R. Then if I pull out a visual cue card that shows a R, then that will apply to all the words that start with just the letter R and all the letters that start with a WR as well. Now I might as well, once I'm showing them the card, be like, oh, I noticed this word has R, like, and write the letter. And this letter has these two letters representing this sound. And we're just increasing their awareness. We don't have to throw one out. Ultimately, we don't want them to need to rely on any of those reminders. They're just going to see the word and know it has a R and produce it correctly when they see it in a text, right?
Mhm.
But on the way, then I do use cards and just try not to depend on them for too long.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We wrapped up here, right? You ready to move on?
Yes, we're good. So, well, this page is
Oh,
an extension. So here was we were working with, this girl had a lisp. And so we're working on the sound. Now she is also in first grade and learning to read more complex spellings of the sounds. So every single time how this worked is I would write the word at the top. So concern, we reviewed where she was putting her tongue for this before we started. This was not her first time practicing. She could read the word, make sure she said it correctly. Then she needed to find which spelling of was in this word. So she's about to write it in the C column there, like where the letter C is. And then she would say, so she has another practice saying the sound, and then she says concern. So just right there, the goal of this lesson was not to target her speech sound production, but it was for the reading and the writing, like the spelling and decoding. But we were able to capitalize on that and get so many practices. So I also just put the letter S so you could see that. And then this is from You Fly. And this is a passage. And so not with her, but with another kid, we found all the words that had this spelling, however way they were spelled. And then they took home their list of words for their home practice. And we were able to practice them at the word level and then back in passages. So just taking advantage of all these opportunities for practice there. At the top, you see that important. So I was able to show like it's not it's
yeah.
and then word chains. So here we have pop changing to top, and we're getting them to incorporate the text. So how I would do this is I would show the visual and have the kid write the word up, and then they have to identify how to change it. And so this is less related to speech sound production, but definitely related to phonemic awareness, which including print is how we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck.
What's that visual from? Sorry to interrupt you.
So this is from a work in progress. It's coming soon, and I will definitely
Oh, cool. Okay.
it's there. And then this picture at the bottom, this is my son, my 5-year-old son. And every session that I start with, until they are able to write their ABCs with 40 correct letters in a minute, we start with writing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, going through the whole ABCs. And so you'll see he's still learning. So I will write it above where he's writing, and we'll go through the whole process. They're saying the name of the letter as they're writing the lowercase letter. We do lowercase letters because you read and write primarily in lowercase. So we want them to know how to say them, how to write them. And then the part that I think is totally an unappreciated benefit of this practice is that you get practice with almost every single phoneme, almost every single speech sound. So even if I have a kid who has a pretty significant phonological disorder, we'll still start off writing the ABCs and saying the sounds, and it's using the stimulability approach kind of, in not using picture cue cards, but they're getting all this practice saying most of the sounds, and it's amazing how much clearer they can get with their speech sound production while they're starting to learn to write their ABCs.
Yeah, no, and they get, like you said, they're getting that continued practice. Did you say they have to get 40 correct letters in a minute?
Yeah, so this is an EBLI thing. And the reasoning is that the faster that you can retrieve a letter, the faster you'll be able to read and write. But once you get, she says that Nora, who created EBLI, she set 40 as the goal. I have kids who can do 60, they can now do 60, go much faster. But once you get to 40, then that's when I generally, and according to EBLI, you don't need to worry about the handwriting production.
So is it rewriting the alphabet again? I'm sorry, I'm
Oh,
counting
good
26
question.
letters.
Oh, I get it. Okay, yeah. So there's 26 letters. So as soon as they get to Z, they go back to A.
Okay.
And then they need to get to, I can't remember what it is, maybe M or something,
Okay.
to finish off their 40.
Okay. Now it makes sense. So you said that you start with lowercase. When do you start introducing uppercase?
So I generally do uppercase on an as needed basis. I find that the preschools are typically much more focused on uppercase letters. So
Yeah.
they're often familiar with them anyways. And then some of them are pretty similar, or once they've mastered it, once we're getting into when we start writing sentences, which is very soon, like that's probably like activity 12 or something, in
Yeah.
using an EBLI approach, then okay, now this is a capital A, and we use this letter, we use this A at the beginning of a sentence and start to show them that. But I don't spend near as much time on uppercase, and it really has not been a problem for most people.
Okay. That's good to know. Now, I know we're not occupational therapists, and there might be an occupational therapist here, so they can answer this in the chat if they'd like. But when do we expect like that fine motor ability in order to like write those letters to start working? And do you recommend tracing or just directly copying?
So I generally do directly copying, and sometimes I'll maybe put some dots. If they really need help, then I might ask them if I can hold their pet marker with them to give them the flow of it. But that's very short-lived. So I'll start off, I'll do an A, and I use the Peterson prompts. That's also, I learned that from EBLI. You can search them for free online. And they have very simple names for strokes. So A would be hook around, short line down, and it shows you how to do it. So it starts off that I would write my A and go hook around, short line down, and then the kid would do it afterwards. Once they don't need that cue anymore, then we'll just say A, and I'll start to go right after them. So just giving them that confidence or that ability to check that they've done it right. Once they know their ABCs, then or are close to it, then I don't need to do it as well. I might just step in and model a letter or give them the verbal instruction for how to make it, or remind them what the next letter is if they need it. But again, our goal is to pull back any supports when as appropriate.
Okay. And you're saying A, B, C, D when you're giving the instruction for the letter versus B.
Yes, that's a good question too. So when the only time that I say the letter names with my students is when we're writing the ABCs.
Okay.
Then at all other times, I'm saying the letter sounds and they're saying the letter sound. And the reason for that is that if they say CAT and they're trying to read it, then what's a CAT? I don't know either. So we really want to get them to say their sounds, and then they can blend them.
Okay. And I think it's good to have like that time where they can also learn the letter names too. Like if you're focusing on the letter sounds in context, then at least they're getting exposure to those letter names in the writing too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So how do you recommend incorporating contextualized language intervention, disciplinary literacy, and curriculum into our practice?
Okay, so we need our kids to make gains where it matters most. And in thinking about these kids, and I got a lot of older students, for younger students too, they need to be able to access written material in their classrooms, meaning their curriculum. We need them to be able to engage in disciplinary literacy, whether that's science, social studies, math. We want them to be able to access them. So we need to support their written and oral language in these areas in the therapy room too, or in our individualized sessions, because we want that connection to be made. As we said before, by bringing in content that applies to where they spend their time, then we're also making it meaningful and relevant. And we're creating all of these shared contexts that we can use to target our language goals, whether that's narrative language or complex syntax or morphology, past tense morphemes. oral language, if we think about oral language, one of the hardest things that I find about teaching oral language and doing speech therapy is that it's fleeting. So the second we say it, it's gone. And our kids might have difficulty remembering what we said. And so that's why we're using all of these visuals. Now, once we have the written language, then we can point, oh, look, here's the morpheme. We know that this whole paragraph was written in past tense. So look, let's find all our EDs, and we can really use the text to anchor the oral language that we are targeting. And again, I think I used anchor both ways, which makes perfect sense because we said that oral and written language are reciprocal. So they're providing an anchor for each other. And so the way that we can have the biggest impact on oral and written language, which is what we need to do, what's in our scope of sequence, what we are uniquely positioned as speech pathologists, as professionals who are working in this area, is to develop both of them by integrating them all the time. And we know that written language relies on the parts of the brain that we use for oral language and then more. So every time we speak something and then we write it down, or we read something and then we say it or we summarize it, we're activating as much of the brain as possible. And that's, I think, why we're getting why we have the possibility to achieve really amazing outcomes across areas. And we also know that written language, we can't just stay in oral language, because written language surpasses oral language in its complexity in terms of vocabulary, in terms of sentence structure. Probably, I'm not sure exactly, maybe around 4th, 5th grade, we start to read more advanced things that we would ever speak. So if we stay only in the oral domain, then we won't ever get to those goals. And that won't be helping our kids access what they need to access. There are some examples of how I would pull in disciplinary literacy and curriculum into what we're doing. So here's this kid that she was reading for Battle of the Books. And so she was reading this book. She's also working on her vocabulary. So when we're also working on her reading comprehension, and her own monitoring for when she didn't know a word. So when she didn't know a word, then we paused, and then she would need to provide a meaning. So we use these Bjorn speech. These are from the story deck, talking about, okay, what's the definition? What's an example of it? What's an antonym? We didn't do all 4 for each word that came up, but just orally went through to make sure that we were able to get meaning from the text. This is another example. This written piece is we're reading a book. We're reading Pets. It's a Scholastic Branches book. I like using those Branches books because they're interesting and they're at a good level for a young reader. And so we read a part of this book where the pets are trying to make this very complex plan happen. And then we flipped the perspective. And so we needed to write what had happened in that chapter from the perspective of the dog that kind of ruined the plan because he was scared. And so then we're activating that narrative language understanding, we're activating that the perspective taking, and we're still building on her reading and writing skills. So just going through, and then we're speaking about it also. So we're working on all of those components at the same time. This is an example. It's not necessarily curriculum based, but this page is from Reading Simplified. So start looking at the sound O. And so we're using homophone cards from the Bjorn homophone deck with long vowels, and then showing the picture of the word, and then needing to decide, okay, which spelling does it go under? And we saw that 2 words can sound the same. So you could have toe, like tow a car away, and toe, painting a toenail, and they're in different sections. And that's just feeds into the semantic flexibility and the executive functioning and all of these skills that we're trying to develop with our students. One of my favorite things that I've been doing is I've been adapting Story Champs, which is an incredible curriculum by Language Dynamics Group. And I've been adapting it to work on instead of these kids, they come and they need to work on their narrative language. We know that narrative language is one of the best ways to develop a kid's language skills, because you can target any goal in it. And we need our kids to be able to tell a story and understand a story. We need them to have the framework, but we might as well support them in learning to read the story as well. So here, presented them with this story about this boy, David, who goes and he gets a shot at the doctor. We created a summary sentence. So it was, David got a shot at the doctor. And then before we did that, we practiced spelling words from it and reading words from it using an EBLI approach. And then they had a chance to sequence it. So they saw the visuals, they retold the story. We removed the visuals and they told the story again without the visuals, like with the fading cues. And this child is able to work on their narrative language within oral language and written language all at the same time, and it really made huge gains. And then here's an example of, this was a word, and just breaking it down into the vocabulary and making a quick web. And you can see that in one activity, we're paying attention to the meaning of the word, the context of the word, the sounds in the word, and the spellings of the word. So lots of good discussion there.
Yeah, I love all of these examples, and those cards are awesome.
Yeah, I really like using the story deck. A few more examples. So the top picture is from the past tense complexity approach for past tense verbs. So it's a research study by Van Horn. And what they found was that we can target the most complex verbs first. And that will, for kids who are not inflecting verbs orally with the past tense verb morpheme. So if we target the most complex verbs first, then the past tense morpheme will generalize to easier verbs, basically. So this deck and the research study had 60 verbs in it, divided by level of complexity. So here, this girl was working on the most complex. She wasn't really inflecting any verbs correctly, but instead of just doing it orally, we did it written. So she needed, here the girl is fishing, and the deck, actually have this one right here. And so talked about, okay, we put the card in a picture frame. Now, yesterday she fished. So now we need to see, how do we spell it? What are the sounds of fished? Ish. And then she needed to write it, and she could identify what sound that morpheme was making in those words. And then we were in the middle of reading Zoe and Sassafras book, which is in the next picture. And there obviously there were past tense verbs on the page, and some of them were in the deck. So we pulled them out. We made sure that she could read them with the morpheme correctly, could then summarize. So then we took away the words and she summarized it using her spoken language, and could just really tie it all together very nicely. So just constantly thinking about, how can we bring our oral and our written language together? This picture, another one at the top, is for a kid who is working, he's working on reading nonfiction information and understanding like main ideas and details, and then also producing a coherent summary. And but even though he's saying it, he wears a hearing aid, and even though he's saying the past tense morpheme, he's dropping it all the time in his writing. So I pulled out the past tense ed morpheme from the Bjorn speech prefix, suffixes, and bases deck, and put it there. And then he was able to self-check. And then we took the main idea, took the topic, divided it into two main ideas, and then he was able to find supporting details, and he could check that he had put that past tense morpheme. Here, she's working on in EBLI, she's working on her spelling and reading, but we found this morpheme ist. We talked about what it meant, and then we quickly went through and how can you apply that to different words, and she was able to read and decode these words. So we're trying to get to that statistical learning where she's seeing a pattern and she's aware that this morpheme exists. And then finally, there's this ReadWorks article. I love taking passages from ReadWorks. This one is from EBLI. It's actually the last activity. And so they read this very complex article about education in America and how it's evolved over the years as the values of the country have changed. And we didn't finish in one session. And so then I pulled out these because, but, so these conjunction cards. It's like, okay, so what did you get? Like, what do you remember? Tell me a sentence using because about what happened in the story. So then it was education wasn't accessible to all kids because families in rural areas live too far away. And by seeing, okay, can they use these more complex sentences? Can they use the conjunctions? And I'm also checking, okay, do they comprehend? What can we do to clarify what they're understanding or what we've read before? You can see in the tiny next to the text, there's little pictographs. So that's from Sketch and Speak by Ukrainians. So she says, after you read a paragraph, you can have them do a quick sketch of the most interesting or most important thing they read and assign a sentence to it. And so I left it up for the next session, and they were able to kind of go through it and remember their sentences. And then we could use those to write a summary. While it would be too taxing to have them write down everything that they say in a session. Definitely want to pick and give them the chance, the practice to write down some of the words. And so then she wrote, the woman fought for education because the girls needed schooling because they had to raise a happy family. So they were talking about Republican motherhood, and it was able to see, okay, they understood this idea for how the woman argued that education was important for them. And we were able to work on these spelling and these writing conventions all at the same time. So like how it ties together.
Yeah, I could definitely see like how the oral language is, working together with the written language. And these are great activity ideas. Okay, so you have some references here and then some resources. Do you want to talk about these a little bit as well?
Yeah, so these are just some resources. I put the Bjorm speech decks that you saw in this presentation. There is a discount code that you're welcome to use. And then also I put Story Champs because I think the world of it, and you saw that visual of it. So also I did not put this on there, but if you want to learn more about structured linguistic literacy, there is a conference coming up. It's called the Structured Linguistic Literacy Summit. And I will share the link with Vanita so that maybe you can put it in the show notes or something.
Yeah. We'll put it in a playbook. And
Okay.
Nicole is going to be on this, so Nicole can share it in the chat as well.
Okay,
what do you know, like, is it a long URL or do you know what it is on the top of your head?
I can find it.
That's okay, because Nicole will find it, the Structured Linguistic Literacy Summit, and she'll put it in the chat for us.
Okay, sounds good. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I think I've heard about it from some other speakers too, so I'm glad that you mentioned it. Is it online or in person?
Yeah, it's online, and there is a free option that you can just sign up and listen. But then I believe if you want access beyond 24 hours after each presentation, then there is a fee. And I attended the conference online last year, and it was incredible. And
Speaking at it, right?
yeah, and so I am also a speaker. I forgot about that, actually. I'm also a speaker on here. I'm a speaker on it, but there are really just giants in the field. And I highly recommend it. It's been those people and then the presentations that I heard last year just have been very transformative and informative for my career and my practice.
Amazing. Oh, well, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's around the same time as this one too.
Yeah.
But like we're speaking not to two different audiences, but I don't think that like we are primarily speech language pathologists, but I do think that you can't get enough of it either. And they're both free. Both live events are free.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So where can everybody find and connect with you?
So I'm most present on my Instagram at Dollhouse Speech and Language. You can also email me at leanne@dollhousespeech.com. And then my website is www.dollhousespeech.com. So that's where to find me.
Amazing. Leanne, this has been incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.